The fig trees should have been full of noise. Jane stood beneath the canopy, her notebook already damp from the humidity, and heard nothing. No hooting, no branches jacking, no playful screams echoing through the leaves. She'd been tracking the group since dawn, following their usual path along the ridge, and now the forest felt wrong. Too still. It was just past 9. The light came down in broken pieces through the trees. She stopped walking. Her boots sank slightly into the damp earth. Ahead, maybe 30 feet, she could see where the chimps had been feeding earlier. Torn leaves. A few scattered figs on the ground. The smell of ripe fruit hung in the air, sweet and almost sticky. But no chimps. She tilted her head, listening. Her heart beat a little faster, though she wasn't sure why. They moved around all the time. They wandered off. This was normal, except something felt different today. The air felt too still. She looked up at the branches where they usually traveled, moving from tree to tree like they owned the sky. Empty. Just leaves moving slightly in a breeze she couldn't feel down here. Jane wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. She took a step forward, then stopped again. Why had they gone quiet? Jane moved forward slowly, placing each foot carefully. The ground was soft here, covered in old leaves that didn't crunch. She could hear her own breathing now. Short, a little shallow. She told herself to relax. This was fine. The chimps probably just moved to another feeding spot. They did that. She'd seen it dozens of times. But then she saw Flo. The old female was sitting on a low branch about 20 feet away, perfectly still. Her back was to Jane. Her shoulders looked tense, pulled up slightly. Flo usually groomed someone this time of morning, or foraged, or played with her infant. She didn't just sit. Jane stopped walking. She watched Flo's back, waiting for movement, waiting for anything. The chimp didn't turn around, didn't shift position, just sat there, facing deeper into the forest. Jane's throat felt tight. She swallowed. Maybe Flo was resting. Maybe she was tired. Jane pulled her notebook out, tried to write the time and Flo's position, but her hand felt clumsy. The pen scratched across the damp paper. She looked up again. Flo still hadn't moved. Then she noticed David Graybeard. He was higher up, maybe 15 feet off the ground, sitting in the crook of a tree. He wasn't eating. His hands were empty. He was staring in the same direction as Flo. His head was completely still. Jane followed their gaze, but saw only shadows and leaves and the thick tangle of vines that grew between the trees. Nothing unusual. Nothing she could identify. Her stomach twisted slightly. She took a breath and held it, listening. Still no calls. No pantots. No sound of the young ones playing. She let the air out slowly through her nose. Where were the others? There should be at least 8 or 9 chimps in this group. She'd counted them yesterday evening before heading back to camp. Jane took 3 steps to her right, trying to get a better angle. A twig snapped under her boot. The sound was small, but sharp. Flo's shoulders twitched. Just barely. But she didn't turn around. Jane froze. Her heart knocked against her ribs. Why didn't Flo look? The chimps always looked when they heard something. Always. They were curious. They paid attention. But Flo kept staring ahead, and David Graybeard didn't even blink. She pressed her lips together. Maybe she was reading too much into this. Maybe they'd heard something deeper in the forest. A leopard. A snake. Something that made them cautious. That would make sense. Jane scanned the trees again, looking for movement, for spots, for anything coiled and dangerous. Nothing. Just green and brown and the filtered morning light that made everything look softer than it was. Then she saw the others. 3 more chimps, all sitting in nearby trees. Everett, Ollie, and one of the younger males she hadn't named yet. They were all facing the same direction, all completely still. Their bodies looked rigid, frozen. Jane's breath came shorter now. She could feel sweat running down her spine, cold despite the heat. This wasn't normal behavior. This was something else. She took a step back without meaning to. Her heel caught on a root, and she stumbled, catching herself on a tree trunk. The bark felt rough under her palm. She steadied herself and looked at the chimps again. None of them had reacted to her stumble. They should have. The movement always got their attention. But they just sat there like statues, like they were watching something she couldn't see. Jane's mind raced. What were they looking at? What did they hear? She strained her own ears, trying to pick up anything. A rustle, a growl, a crack of branches. But there was nothing, just the hum of insects and her own pulse in her ears. She pressed her hand against her chest. Her heart was beating too fast now. She tried to slow it down. I tried to think clearly. Maybe she should leave. Maybe she should back away, give them space. But something held her there. Curiosity, or maybe something else. She needed to understand what was happening. She needed to see what they were seeing. Jane took a slow breath and made herself stay still. Made herself watch. Made herself wait. The chimps didn't move, and neither did she. Jane's legs were starting to ache. She'd been standing in the same spot for maybe 10 minutes now, maybe longer. Time felt strange. Stretched out. She shifted her weight carefully from one foot to the other. The chimps were still frozen in their positions. Still staring. She couldn't look away from them either. Then Flo moved. Just her head. Slow. She turned it to the left, and Jane saw her face for the first time. Flo's eyes were wide. Not panicking. Not scared exactly. Just open. Alert. Her mouth was closed tight. Jane felt her own jaw clench in response. She watched Flo's eyes track something in the shadows. Something Jane still couldn't see. Flo's hand reached out. Her fingers wrapped around the branch in front of her. Her knuckles looked pale against the dark bark. She gripped it hard. Jane could see the tension in her arm. Flo was usually so relaxed, so confident. Jane had watched her for months now, had seen her handle other chimps, handle her babies, handle everything the forest threw at her. But right now, Flo looked uncertain. Jane took a breath. Her ribs felt tight. She wanted to move closer, wanted to see what Flo was seeing. But something stopped her. Some instinct told her to stay back, to not interrupt whatever this was. She pressed her spine against the tree trunk behind her. The bark dug into her shoulder blades through her thin shirt. She barely noticed. David Graybeard made a sound. Not a hoot, not a scream, just a soft grunt, low in his throat. Jane had heard that sound before, but couldn't remember when. It made her stomach drop. Flo's head snapped toward David. Their eyes met. Jane watched the exchange. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. David's face was calm, but his eyes weren't. They looked dark. Seriously. Flo turned back to face the shadows. Jane's hand moved her notebook, but stopped halfway. She couldn't write this down. Not yet. She didn't know what she was seeing. She didn't know what it meant. Her fingers hovered in the air for a moment, then dropped back to her side. She felt useless. Helpless. Like she was watching something private. Something she wasn't supposed to see. The young male in the tree above David started to climb down. His movements were careful, deliberate, not the usual bouncing energy of a young chimp. He placed each hand and foot precisely, tested each branch before putting his weight on it. Jane's eyes followed him. He reached the ground and stood there on all fours. His head was level with his shoulders. His eyes were fixed on the same spot all the others were watching. Then he took a step forward. Just one. Flo made a sharp sound. A quick huff. The young male stopped immediately. He looked up at her. Flo didn't make another sound. Didn't move. But something passed between them. Jane saw it even if she didn't understand it. The young male took a step backward. Then another. He sat down. He was shaking slightly. Jane could see it in his shoulders. Her own hands were shaking too. She pressed them against her thighs. The fabric of her pants felt damp. She realized she'd been sweating more than she thought. Her shirt was stuck to her back. Her hair was plastered to her forehead, but she didn't move to wipe it away. Didn't want to make any sound at all. Flo shifted her position. She pulled her legs up closer to her body, made herself smaller. David did the same thing. Then Ollie. Then Everett. One by one, they all drew inward, compressed themselves. Jane had never seen them do this. When chimps were scared, they usually got loud. They screamed. They ran. They threw things. But this was different. This was quiet fear. Silent fear. The kind that made you small and still and invisible. Jane's throat was so dry it hurt. She tried to swallow, but couldn't. She wanted to look away. Wanted to break the tension somehow. But her eyes stayed locked on Flo. On the way her chest was rising and falling. Fast. Too fast. Flo was breathing hard, even though she wasn't moving. Even though she was sitting perfectly still. Minutes passed. Jane didn't know how many. Her calves were cramping now. Her back hurt from standing so rigid, but she didn't shift position, didn't move at all. She just watched, and waited, and tried to understand. Then Flo blinked. It was such a small thing, just her eyelids closing and opening. But something changed. Jane felt it. The air felt different, less heavy. Flo's shoulders dropped slightly, just a fraction. Her grip on the branch loosened. David made another sound. This one was different, softer, almost like a sigh. The young male stood up. He looked around. His head turned left then right. His movements were still careful, but less frozen, less afraid. He took a few steps forward. Flo didn't stop him this time. Jane watched him move toward the shadows, toward whatever they'd all been staring at. He disappeared into the thick undergrowth. Jane held her breath, waited for a scream, for something bad to happen, but there was nothing, just silence. Then the young male reappeared. He was holding something. Jane squinted. It looked like a branch, just a broken branch. He carried it back and dropped it on the ground. Then he looked up at Flo. Flo looked down at him, and Jane saw something pass between them again. Something she couldn't name. Relief maybe, or understanding, or something else entirely. Flo climbed down from a branch. Slow, careful. She reached the ground and touched the young male's head. Just briefly, just her fingers against his fur. Then she turned and started walking. Not running, just walking. Away from the shadows. Away from whatever had been there. The others followed. One by one they climbed down and walked away. David went last. He paused before leaving. Turned back once. Stared at the shadows for a long moment. Then he followed the others. Jane stood alone. Her legs were shaking now. She leaned harder against the tree. Her notebook slipped from under her arm and fell to the ground. She didn't pick it up. She just stood there, breathing, trying to make sense of what she'd seen, trying to understand what had just happened. But she couldn't. She had no idea. Jane didn't move for a long time after they left. Her legs felt weak. She slid down the tree trunk until she was sitting on the ground, her back still pressed against the bark. The forest was coming back to life around her. Birds were calling again. Insects buzzed near her ears. Somewhere far off, she heard the chimps hooting. Normal sounds, safe sounds, but they felt distant somehow, like they belonged to a different world than the one she'd just been in. She picked up her notebook from where it had fallen. The pages were wrinkled, damp. She opened it and stared at the blank space where she should have written her observations. Her pen was still clipped to the cover. She took it out, pulled it over the paper, but nothing came. No words, no notes. She didn't know what to write. Chimps sat still and stared at shadows, didn't capture it, didn't come close. Her hand dropped to her lap. She looked at the spot where Flo had been sitting. The branch was still there, still swaying slightly from where Flo had gripped it. Jane could almost see the outline of her, the shape of her body against the leaves. She watched Flo for months now. Had started to feel like she knew her moods, knew her patterns. But sitting here now, Jane realized how little she actually understood. She'd been so focused on documenting, on recording behaviors, on proving that chimps used tools, that they had personalities, that they were more like humans than anyone thought. She'd been trying to translate them, to make them make sense in human terms. But what she just witnessed didn't translate. It existed in a space she couldn't reach with words or notebooks or scientific observation. Jane closed her eyes. She could still see Flo's face, the way her eyes looked, wide and aware and responding to something Jane couldn't perceive. The chimps had been communicating. She was sure of that now, but not with sounds, not with gestures she recognized, with something else, something quiet, something that moved between them in glances and small shifts in posture and silence that meant different things depending on who was silent and when. She'd always known animals communicated. Of course they did, but she'd thought of it as simpler than human communication. More basic, clearer. One call meant danger. Another meant food. But this had been complex, layered. Flo had stopped the young male with just a look and a single short sound. Had told him something specific, something he understood immediately. And Jane had no idea what it was. Her chest felt tight, not from fear anymore, from something else. Humility maybe, or wonder, or the strange ache of realizing you're standing at the edge of something vast that you'll never fully enter. She'd been so confident when she arrived in Gom, so sure she could figure them out, learn their language, understand their world. But maybe understanding wasn't the point. Maybe it never had been. She opened her eyes and looked at the shadows where they'd all been staring. The undergrowth was thick there, dark. She couldn't see more than a few feet in. She thought about walking over, looking for what had been there. Tracks maybe, or signs of a predator, or something that would explain everything and make her feel better, make her feel like she understood. But she didn't move, because part of her didn't want to know. Part of her wanted to leave it mysterious. Leave it as something that belonged to them and not to her. She'd spent so much time trying to get closer, trying to be accepted, trying to prove she wasn't a threat. And she'd succeeded. They let her follow them, let her sit near them, let her watch. But that didn't mean she was one of them. That didn't mean she'd ever see what they saw or feel what they felt. Jane looked down at her hands. They were scratched from pushing through branches, dirty from the forest floor. She'd been here for months, and she was still an outsider. Would always be an outsider. But maybe that was okay. Maybe her job wasn't to become a chimpanzee. Maybe it was just to witness, to pay attention, to respect the parts she couldn't understand. She thought about Flo's hand on the young male's head. That brief touch. It was gentle, reassuring, full of something that looked like care, like love. Jane felt her throat tighten. She'd seen mothers touch their children like that, had felt her own mother's hand on her head when she was small and scared. The gesture was the same, but what it meant to Flo and what it meant to a human mother might be completely different. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe that was the point. Maybe some things translated and some things didn't, and both could be true at once. She stood up slowly. Her legs were stiff. Her knees cracked. She brushed the dirt off her pants and looked back toward where the chimps had gone. She could follow them, could catch up, could continue her observations like normal. But something had shifted inside her. She wasn't just collecting data anymore. She was witnessing life. Complex lives. Lives that existed fully whether she understood them or not. Jane picked up her notebook and started walking. Not toward the chimps. Toward camp. She needed to sit with this. I need to let it settle. She'd come back tomorrow. I would watch them again. I would write things down and try to make sense of patterns and behaviors. But she'd do it differently now. With more questions. With less certainty. With the understanding that some things would always remain beyond her reach. And that was okay. That was how it should be. That evening, Jane sat outside her tent with a cup of tea going cold in her hands. The sun was setting behind the hills, turning everything orange and pink. She could hear the chimps settling in for the night somewhere in the distance. Their calls were peaceful now. Content, like nothing unusual had happened at all. She kept thinking about that moment. The stillness. The way they'd all known something she couldn't know. She'd gone back to the spot later in the afternoon, after she'd rested. She'd searched the undergrowth where they'd been staring. Found nothing. No tracks. No broken branches. No signs of anything that would explain their behavior. Whatever had been there was gone. Or maybe it had never been there at all. Maybe it was something only they could sense. That bothered her at first. Not knowing. She'd always been someone who needed answers. Who asked questions until things made sense. But sitting here now, watching the light fade, she realized the not knowing was part of it. Part of what made this work matter. She wasn't here to solve them. She was here to be with them. To watch them live their lives in all their mystery and complexity. It changed something in her. Made her feel smaller in a good way. Less important. Less central. The forest didn't exist for her to study it. The chimps didn't behave in ways meant for her to understand. They just were. And she got to witness that. That was the gift. She thought about connection. Real connection. Not the kind where you understand everything about someone, but the kind where you sit in silence together and feel something passing between you even without words. She'd felt that today with Flo watching her. Being present with her fear. Not able to help or explain or fix it. Just being there. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. Jane set down her tea and looked up at the darkening sky. She wondered if anyone watching this would understand. If they'd ever had a moment with an animal where something passed between them. Something unspoken. Something true. A dog who knew you were sad before you cried. A cat who sat with you when you were sick. A bird who looked at you and you felt seen. Have you ever felt like an animal understood you in Ways you couldn't explain?